Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world many have imagined but few truly understand. A world hidden behind thick stone walls, echoing with quiet footsteps, candlelight, and the unspoken weight of vows. We're not entering a castle or a battlefield. Tonight, no feasts, no swords. We're entering the convent home to generations of medieval nuns who lived lives of silence, simplicity, and surprisingly interrupted sleep. So take a deep breath, let the world slip a little farther away. Dim your lights, cozied up under the blankets, and let the hush of the past lull you gently toward sleep. Tonight, we begin our journey into the secret nightlife of medieval nuns. And if you're imagining peaceful women praying quietly in warm candlelit chapels before floating off to feather beds, you might want to lower those expectations just a little. Let's begin with one of the most peculiar details. Medieval nuns didn't sleep like we do today. They followed a pattern known as segmented sleeper rhythm, shared with most pre-industrial societies but shaped uniquely by devotion. Instead of a single 8-hour block, their night was broken in two. First sleep, followed by a waking period. Then second sleep. But unlike most medieval peasants who might use this midnight interval to stoke a fire or swat mosquitoes, nuns did something very specific with this time. They got up and prayed, every night. Without exception, this midnight prayer wasn't a punishment, it was an obligation. Part of something called the Divine Office, a sacred schedule of 8 daily prayer sessions, evenly spaced from early morning to deep night, and 2 of those. They happened long after sundown, in the dead of night, when even owls were second-guessing their life choices. The first of these was matins, typically scheduled around 2 a.m., though this could shift depending on the season or the convent's interpretation of holy time. Imagine it. You've just fallen asleep, curled beneath a coarse wool blanket on a straw-stuffed mattress. The stone walls around you are breathing cold. Your breath puffs out in pale clouds, and then softly, almost kindly, the bell begins to ring. Not the grand tolling of a cathedral bell, just a small handbell, rung gently as a sister walks the corridor, alerting each cell in turn. It's time. Time to wake. Time to pray. There were no words exchanged, no idle chatter. Silence was sacred. Speech was sparing. You would rise slowly and quietly, dress in darkness, no lights, except the flicker of an oil lamp. There were no nightgowns, no fleece robes, no woolly socks pulled over sleepy toes. You simply added layers over your habit, wrapped your shawl tighter, and joined the others. One by one, sisters emerged from their cells, moving like shadows, barely speaking, their footsteps on cold stone, the only sign of life in a building that never truly slept. They entered the vast, echoing with stillness. Each nun slipped into her wooden stall, head bowed, eyes lowered, and slowly, softly, the chanting began. It wasn't music in the way we think of music now. No harmonious, just plain sentient Latin verses sung in unison, a river of sacred words rising and falling like breath. To modern ears, it might sound haunting, but in that world, it was a kind of spiritual heartbeat. A reminder that even when the world outside was dark and silent, the soul had its duties. Matins could last an hour or more, longer during feast days or holy seasons. It wasn't meant to be entertaining. It was meant to shape you to train the mind, discipline the flesh, and remind the spirit of its place in the universe. When the prayers ended, the nuns didn't always return straight to sleep. Some might stay to pray privately. Others swept the chapel, or moved quietly to prepare bread for the next day, light fires, or refill lamps. Only after that would they slip back into their narrow beds, curl into warmth, and begin their second sleep. This wasn't seen as exhausting or strange. It was the routine of devotion. To wake in the night was to remind yourself that God never slept, and neither should your soul. But let's be honest, that all sounds very noble from a distance. In practice, it was cold. It was exhausting, and, in the winter, absolutely brutal. Stone doesn't keep heat well. Convent dormitories, often called dorter halls, were unheated, windowless, and unadorned. The only warmth came from the body heat of dozens of women packed into a single space, lying in long rows, heads aligned, each in her assigned place. Beds weren't beds like we imagine them. No down pillows, no feather duvets. You got a wooden frame if you were lucky. More often, it was a straw-stuffed sack on a low platform or the bare stone floor, topped with a thin sheet of linen and one rough woolen blanket. If you were particularly pious, you might sleep with less. Some saints refused pillows altogether. One nun reportedly replaced her mattress with bundles of nettles, believing that pain would bring her closer to Christ. We do not recommend this. There were no private rooms for most. The convent dormitory was one large communal space. You could lie there, 3 feet from Sister Agnes, 5 feet from Sister Gertrude, 20 from the novice who always snored, and everyone obeyed the rule of silence. You didn't speak, you didn't whisper. If you had a nightmare, you hugged your rosary and kept it to yourself. And yet, despite all this hardship, sleep wasn't meaningless. It was just another form of obedience. The rhythm of waking and sleeping, praying and lying still, wasn't accidental. It was a way of shaping time, of resisting the body's laziness, of ensuring that, even in slumber, you remained tethered to your vow. Of course, there were exceptions. Some nuns broke the rules. Documents survive from church councils and abbey complaints about young sisters sneaking out of their cells during the midnight interval to meet local men, spy on passing pilgrims, or simply enjoy a moment of forbidden freedom under the stars. One abbot, in 1298, scrawled furiously in a margin, "Let them pray, with eyes open, not with feet beyond the walls," but such rebellion was rare. For most, the midnight break wasn't a chance to escape. It was a sacred pause, a time to reflect, to rest lightly, and to rejoin the rhythm of the convent when the next bell rang at dawn. Speaking of which, lauds, the next prayer of the divine office, came at sunrise, and with it began another full day of chores, study, labor, and more prayer, which means that, in the life of a medieval nun, sleep was never really sleep. It was something closer to obedient rest, a humble moment of surrender, not to dreams, but to duty. And while modern beds are softer and silence more optional, there's still something hauntingly beautiful about it all. The chill stone, the ancient chant, the candlelit corridors echoing with quiet purpose. So the next time you wake in the middle of the night, groggy and annoyed, remember this: somewhere, centuries ago, a group of women was rising to pray in the dark. Not because they had to, but because their lives were shaped entirely by a belief that even sleep should serve the soul. And just as they pulled their cloaks tighter and shuffled quietly into chapel, we'll begin to shuffle, too, into the next part of their story, because, while sleep in the convent was sparse and solemn, the day that followed was no less strange. Endless chores, secret writing, coded glances, and a vow of silence that was rarely as silent as it seemed. But we'll explore that next time. For now, let the hush return. Let the flickering torchlight fade, and let your thoughts settle like dust on cold stone. Sleep, like prayer, comes in intervals. And this one, it's just beginning. The bell tolls again. This time, not at midnight, but just before dawn. It echoes softly through the stone corridors, tapping gently on the edges of sleep. The sky beyond the convent walls is still indigo, caught between night and morning, and the air carries the damp, earthy stillness of pre-dawn silence. The nuns stir quietly. There are no yawns, no lazy stretches, just the soft rustle of woolen robes and the occasional whisper of leather sandals on flagstone floors. It's time for lauds, the second service of the day, a prayer for sunrise, a song for the new light, even if that light won't peek through the narrow convent windows for another hour. The sisters file silently into the chapel, one by one, their heads covered, their eyes lowered. It's not humility in the modern sense. It's training, ritual, a way of living where even the body's posture is an offering. Inside the chapel, the air is thick with old incense and the faintest hint of damp moss. The candles flicker along the stone walls, casting long shadows that dance like memory. And then, as if from the bones of the building itself, comes the chanting, soft, steady, Latin verses that roll like waves, rising from lips that have sung the same syllables since girlhood. This is monastic life, a life of routine, of sacred time, a life that, from the outside, might look unbearably quiet, But inside these walls, silence speaks. After lauds, the day truly begins. But there are no breakfast spreads or warm hearths. There's porridge, if the season is kind, maybe a crust of bread, served in a narrow dining hall under strict silence, with only a single reader reciting scripture aloud for all to hear. This was called the refectory, and meals here weren't about conversation. They were about absorption, of food, of scripture, of humility. The reading might be a saint's life, a gospel passage, or, occasionally, a stern reminder from the rule of Saint Benedict, which governed almost every convent in medieval Europe. The rule was precise: sleep in moderation, eat sparingly, speak only when necessary, obey without delay. To the modern mind, it may sound harsh, but for nuns, it was the structure that held the world together. After breakfast, each sister would move to her assigned duties. And no, these weren't all spiritual. Many were incredibly physical. There were gardens to tend, cloisters to sweep, linens to wash in cold water, drawn by hand from the well. Some copied manuscripts, their fingers stained with ink, backs hunched over wooden desks as they carefully inked each page of a prayer book that might take years to finish. Others baked bread, mended shoes, dyed cloth. Convents were not idle sanctuaries. They were small economies, self-sustaining, disciplined, and quietly industrious. But perhaps the most fascinating of these daily duties was the scriptorium, the writing room, dimly lit, smelling of vellum and ink. This was where knowledge lived. Here, a few literate nuns, often the most senior or the most gifted, would transcribe holy texts. But not only scriptures. Sometimes they preserved herbal remedies. Sometimes medical instructions. And sometimes they wrote letters. Long, delicate communications to bishops, patrons, or even other convents. Occasionally, they smuggled in poetry. Yes, poetry. Delicate verses about longing, nature, sorrow, and divine love. There are surviving fragments believed to be penned by cloistered women. Some are so tender, so yearning, they almost pulse with human breath. One reads, "My soul is a bird, caged in shadow. It sings, but none can hear, save God, who listens in silence." The lines aren't signed, they're anonymous, but you can almost feel the ink drying beneath candlelight, centuries ago, under the careful hand of a woman who had been silent all her life, but still wanted to be heard. And that's something rarely spoken aloud about convent life, the tension between silence and voice. Because while nuns took vows of silence, they were rarely mute. They whispered, they passed notes, they developed signs and gestures like a secret language to say what couldn't be said. A flick of the hand meant pass the bread. 2 fingers pointed at the floor might mean mouse. A full blink and a raised eyebrow. Probably Sister Cecilia's singing off-key again. The vow of silence wasn't cruel. It was contemplative. But human nature finds a way. And when the sun rose high above the convent roof, warming the tiles and casting thin lines of light through the chapel's narrow windows, the day rolled onward. Some sisters taught young novices, barely out of childhood, who'd been given to the church, before they ever knew what silence meant. Others tended to the sick, administering herbal teas and whispered prayers in cold infirmary halls. But all through it, every hour, every task the day was divided by bells. Sacred interruptions, prime terce, sext, nun, vespers, each name a kind of anchor. Each prayer, a moment to pause the world and turn inward again. To kneel, to chant, to be reminded. And slowly, as the sky began to blush gold, the final prayers approached Conclin, the last of the divine office. The prayer for protection during the night, for a quiet mind, for a peaceful death, should the soul be called before morning. It's beautiful, really, this bookending of the day. Matins to Compline, darkness to darkness. A sacred rhythm, pulsing like the heartbeat of the convent. And when Compline ends, the sisters file once more into the dorter. They undress, quietly kneeling at the edge of their beds for one final prayer. Then slip beneath scratchy blankets, their hands still clasped, rosaries wrapped loosely around cold fingers. Sleep, again, comes in segments. And between them, the bell will call. But for now, just now, the silence is real. The breath of the building stills. And above, in the eaves, a lone owl blinks once and takes flight. Outside, the world continues. Villagers prepare for storms. Merchants count their coins. Sailors drink by firelight. But within the convent walls, the night settles in like a second skin, and even the walls seem to exhale. But beneath that calm, not all is as quiet as it seems, because the convent wasn't always just a place of prayer. Sometimes it was a place of secrets, hidden relics, forbidden texts, strange dreams whispered in the dark. But we'll get there in time. For now, close your eyes. Let your breath slow. Let the rhythm of prayer, of sleep, of ancient stone guide you gently toward rest, because in the next part of our journey, we step deeper into the unknown, into the mysteries held in silence, and the women who dared to keep them. Sleep gently. The bell won't ring for hours. The wind rises. Outside the convent walls, it brushes against the timber beams like fingers across a harp. The trees creak faintly. The chapel roof moans, and somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a fox cries into the dusk. One sharp, lonely note, before silence folds back over the land. Inside the cloister, the walls do not stir. Stone holds steady. Torches burn low, and the sisters move like shadows, gliding through corridors carved by centuries. It's after Compline now. The official day is done. And yet, for some, especially those who have lived within these walls, for decades the night is not an end. It is the real beginning. The rest of the world has gone to sleep, but the convent breathes differently after dark. Deeper, slower, older. This is the time of the great silence, observed after the final prayers until dawn. No words, no movement unless necessary. Only the quiet breath of dozens of women bound, not by chains, but by choice. But tonight, there is an energy beneath the hush. A stirring dot, because Mother Elsbetha has summoned the eldest sisters to the chapter house. No bell was rung. No summons announced aloud. Only a series of candle marks placed in the stone alcove outside the refectory. A code older than parchment. The sisters know. They gather in silence. Their faces are lit only by the flicker of flame, their expressions unreadable beneath their linen veils. The chapter house door closes with a sound like a held breath, and the convent, outwardly, returns to stillness. But something is happening. Inside that room, beneath carved wooden rafters and the gaze of painted saints, the sisters do not pray. They speak, softly, deliberately, of the dreams. Because for the past 5 nights, each of them has woken with the same image pressed behind their eyes. A stone door, half buried beneath roots. A voice, distant but clear, calling not in Latin but in some older tongue. And the unmistakable smell of iron and roses. Mother Elsbetha listens with her eyes closed. She does not interrupt. Only when the last sister speaks does she rise from her chair and cross to the east wall, the one with no windows. There, set into the stone, is a narrow iron grate. Most believe it to be a vent. Some believe it to be a relic niche, but Elsbetha knows it as something else. Because long ago, when she was still a novice, she found a letter behind that grate. A letter written not in Latin, but in Old Norse, its edges brittle, its ink rust-colored, like blood turned to shadow. She never spoke of it. Not to her confessor. Not even to the abbess who came before. But now the letter burns in her mind. Because it, too, spoke of dreams, of voices, of something waiting beneath the oldest part of the convent, the foundations laid before. The church itself arrived. The elder sisters murmur. One crosses herself. Another whispers the name of Saint Apollonia, patron of those tormented by visions. But Elsbetha does not pray. She takes a candle from the wall and turns toward the west cloister. And without a word, they follow. The west cloister is rarely visited. Its floor is uneven, its windows narrow. The saints painted on its walls are older, darker, their faces worn, by time, into half-smiles and haunted stares. Beneath one of these saints, Saint Odile, the blind seer, there is a door, small, iron-banded, and locked. No key has opened it in over 100 years. It is known simply as the Forgotten Room, a name passed down from nun to nun in whispers, like a caution or a dare. But tonight, Mother Elsbetha reaches into the folds of her robe and draws forth a small bone-colored key. It glows pale in the candlelight, smooth, unadorned. Ancient, she slides it into the lock. The door groans as it opens. Dust rolls out like breath held for generations, and behind it stairs, stone, damp, descending. The sisters exchange no words, only nods then, one by one. They descend into the dark. The passage below the west cloister smells of earth and memory. The air is thick, not stale, exactly but full, like every breath carries with it the echoes of centuries. This was once a crypt, they suspect, long before it was sealed. The ceiling curves low overhead. Old beams sag from age and moisture, and along the walls they begin to see carvings, not Christian, not Latin, symbols that twist like vines, some woven with birds, others with strange creatures, half horse, half stag. One, unmistakably, is a Voknet, 3 interlocked triangles, a sign of Odin, the Norse god of war, wisdom, and death. What is it doing here? The candlelight flickers violently, as if reacting. One sister nearly drops her flame. They continue. Finally, the corridor widens into a chamber, small, circular, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center, a stone sarcophagus, carved with runes, bound in iron. Upon it, a symbol none of them have ever seen, a rose. Made of bone, Mother Elsbetha kneels. The others follow. There are no prayers now, only the sound of the wind above, whispering through the floorboards of the convent like an impatient ghost. One of the younger sisters leans forward. "I've seen this in my dream," she whispers. Her voice is the first true voice spoken all. Elsbetha does not scold her. She only places a hand on the lid of the sarcophagus. It is warm, warmer than stone should be, and suddenly, from above a sound, the bell. But it is not matins. It is not prime. It is a bell. No one alive remembers. A bell that has not rung in centuries. The sisters look to Elsbetha. Her face is pale, but her eyes are lit with something between fear and reverence. "It's time," she says. But she does not explain what. And above them, in the dormitory, the other sisters stir. Some half wake, sensing the change. Others remain asleep, their dreams full of roses and roots. And outside, the wind rises again. The fox does not cry this time. The night simply listens and waits. There are sounds only ancient stone can make. Soft clicks, low groans. The creaking stretch of matter, remembering its own age. In the dim light of a candle flame, these sounds become voices. Not clear, not loud, but steady, as if the walls themselves are whispering back. The sisters descend further. Beneath the convent, beneath the chapter house, beneath the very foundation of the faith they vowed to protect. Their footsteps press into a floor, no longer smoothed by centuries of sandals. Dust curls around their hems like old breath, and the air changes. It gets heavier, not stifling, not yet, but aware, like stepping into the nave of a forgotten church, where no prayer has risen in 100 years, and yet something still listens. Mother Elsbetha leads without speaking. Her candle burns low. Her face is unreadable. Behind her walk 6 sisters, not young, not new, each chosen, not for piety, but for memory, because these are the ones who remember stories no longer told, the ones who, as novices, overheard the elders whispering of the place below, the ones who dreamed of symbols long buried beneath rosaries and Latin psalms. The corridor narrows, and the walls begin to change. No longer simple stone, now carvings appear, crude, overlapping, almost frantic. Symbols scratched by trembling. Hands a raven with 3 eyes. A woman holding a flame in one hand, and a skull in the other. A tree with roots spiraling downward, instead of up. And beneath it all, a name. Not Latin, not Christian, schooled. One sister pauses. "Isn't she one of the Norns?" she whispers. "Elspeth, from the old stories." Mother Elsbetha nods once. Past, present, future, she says softly. Schooled was the one who saw. What was yet to come? A silence follows. Not the great silence they vow to keep, but something deeper. Something instinctual. Because they all know, even if they will not say it aloud, that something waits beyond the next threshold. Something older than the convent. Older than the prayers they've memorized since girlhood. And possibly, something sacred, or something not. The tunnel ends in an archway choked with roots. They twist through the stone like veins. Thick, dark, reaching a symbol has been carved into the arch. A perfect circle, surrounded by 3 arrows. One sister traces it with trembling fingers. It's not Norse, she murmurs. Not entirely, no, says Elsbetha. This came before them. She steps forward, lifting her candle, and there, beyond the roots, lies a chamber. Unlike the narrow passages before, this room breathes. It opens like a mouth wide, circular, lined with smooth black stone. At the center, a dais, and on the dais, a basin, stone cracked, filled to the brim, not with water, but ashes. The sisters file in slowly. Their sandals click against the polished floor, not cobbled, not laid, but poured. As if cast in a single night by hands no longer human. Around the chamber, more symbols. A woman's face, carved in profile, eyes shut. A sun, split in half. A serpent, devouring its own tail. The O-U-R-O-B-O-R-O-S. Not Christian, not even Norse. This was something pre-faith, a faith of the earth, of time itself. Elsbetha approaches the basin. She does not touch it, only leans forward. The ashes shift, and suddenly, the chamber hums. Not loudly, not violently, but enough that every sister feels it in her teeth. A low thrum, like a song buried beneath bone. Then, the youngest sister gasps. She's looking toward the far wall. It moved, she says. Something, in the ash, moved. The candlelight flickers, and then, it happens again. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in every heart present. The sensation is clear. Something in this chamber just woke up. They do not run, they do not scream. They are nuns, but still they step back. Hands grasping at rosaries, lips forming silent prayers only. Elsbetha stands firm. She lifts her candle toward the wall opposite the basin, and reveals a final carving. A woman kneeling, but not in prayer. Her hands are lifted not toward heaven, but into the earth. Fingers spread wide, mouth open, as if in song, or scream, or both. Beneath her feet, roots. Above her head, stars. The inscription below her is faded, but 2 words remain. Dormiens vigilat. She sleeps, whispers Elsbetha, but she watches. The sisters exchange glances. The wind has stopped. The world above feels distant. One of them shivers. I dreamed of her, she says. When I was a novice, I thought it was just a story. Another nods. I dreamed the same. And a third. And a fourth. One by one, they speak, breaking their vow of silence, not for gossip or confession, but for truth. Each has seen the woman beneath the roots. Each has heard her call in sleep. Each has awoken with a word on her lips. She does not understand. Elsbetha steps back from the basin. We are not the first to come here, she says, and we will not be the last. Then, she kneels. Not in submission, but in invitation. She bows her head, places her palm against the ash, and whispers, "Speak." The chamber does not explode. The ash does not rise in fire, but somewhere, from deep within the earth, a sound echoes, a breath, not human, not monstrous, just old, and in that breath, a message not spoken, but felt. I have waited. The sisters fall to their knees, not out of fear, but recognition. This place, this power, this memory, it is not against them, it is them. A part of the convent forgotten by words, but not by time. A root beneath the doctrine, a flame beneath the liturgy. Elsbetha opens her eyes. She is crying, not in sorrow, but in reverence. We were not sent here to keep silence, she says. We were sent here to listen. And above them, faintly, the bell rings again, only once. But this time, Every sister hears it, even those asleep in their beds, far above, and in their dreams. They see her, the woman in the ash, watching, waiting, waking. Not all awakenings are loud. Some arrive like fog, creeping low and soundless through the bones of old buildings, brushing against the memories held in mortar and wood. Others settle behind the eyes, like dreams that refuse to end when you open them. This was one of those by the time morning broke over the convent roof. The world above stirred with routine. Bells chimed softly. Crows pecked at the frost-covered earth, and the kitchen fires began to roar to life in the east wing. But down below the floorboards, the tapestries, and the hymns, 7 women knelt in a circle of ash, their minds somewhere between the present and a time they did not know how to name. Mother Elsbetha had not moved in hours. The ash basin still steamed faintly where she had placed her palm. The carvings above her flickered with candlelight. Behind her, Sister Magda, eldest of the group, stood stiff and silent, her hands clenched at her sides, her expression unreadable. Magda had entered the convent before most of the others had learned to write. She had scrubbed floors during winters so cold her fingers bled. She had sung the Mass for the dead more times than she could count, but this was something beyond. Psalms and penance. It wants something, she said at last. Her voice broke the tension like the first crack in a frozen pond. The others looked toward her, not a voice. Not exactly, Magda continued, but a wait. A call, like being named without hearing it. Sister Elena, the youngest of them, wiped her eyes. She had always been the dreamer, the one who hummed softly when she worked. The other. Nuns gently teased for seeing patterns in candle wax and shadows. Now her eyes were wide and fevered. She showed me a tree, Elena whispered. In the dream, black bark, gold leaves. Its roots reached all the way down to where the stars lived. Magda scoffed, not unkindly. Dreams are not scripture, girl. But Elsbetha turned slowly. They are when we all have the same one. The silence that followed felt thick, ceremonial, as if a line had been crossed that could not be recrossed. Back in the convent proper, Sister Helena rang the bell for prime. She was tall, stooped, and nearly blind in one eye, but her ears were keen. She had not been summoned to the chapter. How's the night before? She had not walked the narrow steps beneath the west cloister, but she felt something shift in the convent, a pressure drop in the soul. When she rang the bell, it sounded different, as if the metal remembered something it hadn't sung for centuries. She lowered her hand and stared upward. The rafters seemed darker than usual, the air heavier. She crossed herself once, then twice. Down below, the sisters began to rise. Elsbetha touched the edge of the basin once more, then withdrew her hand. The ash did not stir, but the message was already burned into her bones. We must seal this place again, said Sister Marin, who had spoken little during the descent. Her voice was deep and calm, the voice of someone who had survived things without ever speaking of them. If we leave it open, others will come. Curiosity will spread. We will lose what little we understand. Elena's eyes flashed. No, we should learn more. This is a gift, not a threat. I felt peace. Magda shook her head. It's a mirror, she said flatly. Whatever's in there shows us what we already are. That's why it speaks to each of us differently. Elsbetha listened. The debate felt familiar. It echoed old councils, Rome versus rites, obedience versus mystery. The church had spent centuries trying to root out memory, the kind that wasn't written in Latin, but some roots were too deep. I don't believe it means harm, Elsbetha said, but it may not care about harm either. They stood in silence then, 7 women, bound by vows, by duty, and now by something else entirely, something older than the cross on their breast, older than the ink on their pages. Above, Sister Helena moved quietly through the refectory. The others had begun to rise, bleary-eyed, muffled in linen and wool. The great silence was not yet broken, but small signs of life stirred. Bread warmed near the hearth. Someone sneezed in the dormitory. A novice dropped a pitcher, but Helena moved with purpose. She did not go to her usual place near the windows. Instead, she walked to the west corridor. She felt a pull. She would later say it was like following a thread in the dark, not because she chose to, but because she knew she must dot down below. Elsbeth led the sisters back through the carved arch, past the roots that trembled faintly, as if breathing. They did not speak as they passed the carvings. They did not pause at the strange door, where the valknut shimmered faintly in the candlelight. Only when they reached the iron-banded door beneath St. Odile did they stop. Elsbetha turned. She looked at each face. Alina flushed and afraid, Magda stern, lips pressed, Moran watching the floor. The others, somewhere between awe and confusion. Then, she said, "We will not tell the others." But Alina began. "We will not tell them," Elsbetha repeated. "Not yet." Magda exhaled slowly. "For now," she said, "we keep vigil." Elsbetha nodded, and we listen. Later that day, when the sun was high and the convent bustled again with quiet routine, a nun was found in the cloister garden, not hurt, not asleep, just standing, eyes wide, mouth open, hands curled against her chest. When asked what she had seen, she said only, "She was there, in the rosebed, beneath the soil, watching me." She wept, but not in terror. And as the other sisters gently led her away, none of them noticed the small sapling growing at her feet. Its bark, black. Its leaves, gold dot above the dormitory. The bell rang again, though no one pulled its rope, and below, deep beneath the chapel stones, the ash stirred, once more, waiting, listening, remembering. Faith doesn't fracture like glass. It bends first. It creaks, like old timber beneath a storm, swaying under pressure until it either snaps or settles into a new shape. By the end of the week, the convent of St. Osith was bending in ways it had not in generations, and no one was saying why. On the surface, life remained routine. The bells chimed 7 times a day. The bread was kneaded before dawn. The novices swept the cloisters in silence, eyes downcast and lips sealed by vow. But underneath, far underneath, a second rhythm had begun, one made not of prayers, but listening, one that beat not from the chapel bell tower, but from the roots beneath it. Those who had descended into the dark chamber with Elsbetha had begun to change, not visibly, not dramatically, but subtly, like wine darkening in the cask. Sister Magda, once harsh in tone and rigid in ritual, now sat quietly during evening prayers, staring just a few seconds too long at the flame of her taper. Her fingers traced unseen patterns into the wooden pews. She didn't hum. She didn't blink much either. Sister Marin, who used to scold novices for chewing herbs too loudly, now walked the corridors at night, barefoot. When asked why, she simply said, "The floor remembers us." And Alina, sweet, soft Alina, who once avoided the cellar stairs for fear of rats, now spent hours in the kitchen garden, whispering to the soil. She didn't remember what she said, but the carrots grew faster where she knelt. The rest of the convent began to notice. Sister Beatrix, the infant, found herself increasingly concerned. She watched from the apothecary window as Magda knelt beneath the apple tree in the rain, motionless for nearly an hour. "I know what devotion looks like," Beatrix murmured to herself, "and that's not it." Beatrix was no stranger to madness. She had tended plague victims, watched fevers burn through faith. She once held a sister as her mind unraveled after childbirth. But this was different. This was shared, and quiet, and ancient. When she asked Mother Elsbetha about it, the prioress smiled. "Sometimes faith returns in ways we do not expect," she said. Beatrix did not smile back. Sister Helena, nearly blind, was the first 2 acts she had heard whispers in the stone since the day. She took her veil. She thought they were just the echoes of bells, or tricks of aging years. But now, they had names, and stories, and instructions. She found Elsbetha in the chapter house before Lauds. "You've opened something," she said simply. Elsbetha turned slowly. The candle behind her flickered. "I did not open it," she said. Listened. Helena's voice hardened. "There is a difference between faith and folly." "I know," said Elsbetha, "and we've built both into our walls." That evening, a meeting was called. Only the eldest were summoned. those who had taken final vows. The chapter house was lit with oil lamps, and the air smelled of sage. They did not kneel. They did not chant. They sat in a circle, eyes level. "This presence beneath us," said Elsbetha, "is not new. It has been part of this ground since before the convent was built." "Before Rome," added Magda quietly. "Before Christ," said Marin. A pause. Beatrix folded her arms. "And you find this comforting?" "I find it necessary," said Elsbetha. "We are caretakers of a space we did not fully understand. Now we begin to see." Helena shook her head. "And when the bishop sends inspectors, when Rome hears of this, what will you say? That you're praying to a woman in the roots?" "She is not a god," said Helena. "She is memory," said Magda. "Older than Scripture, but not against it." "But not of it either," snapped Beatrix. The room fell quiet. Then Elsbetha spoke. "I am not asking you to worship. I am asking you to remember." "To remember what?" asked Helena bitterly. Elsbetha met her gaze. "The part of us that predates obedience." Elsewhere in the convent, far from oil lamps and formal councils, Sister Agnes wandered into the library. Agnes was not a leader. She did not debate theology. She preferred silence and pages. She had not been called to the underground chamber, but she had dreamed of it. For 3 nights in a row, she saw the same thing: a black basin, a woman's face carved in ash, and a voice that called her by her childhood name, a name she had not spoken in 20 years. She searched the scriptorium shelves for anything that might explain it. Not the psalters, not the sea, a tea fish. She needed the old things. And then behind a forgotten linen-bound treatise on agricultural customs of Flanders, she found a scroll. It was brittle, its ink reddish-brown, but the words were unmistakable. Dormiens vigilat. She sleeps, but she watches. Agnes felt her pulse. Slow. This wasn't new. This wasn't heresy. This was inheritance. Back in the garden, the sapling beneath the rosebed now had 2 more sprouts. Helena visited it at dusk. She did not pray. She only listened, and as the wind moved through the leaves, she smiled. "She's not sleeping anymore," she whispered. "She's learning us." That night, Helena locked her door. She sprinkled salt at the threshold. She muttered protective psalms, and yet, at midnight, she awoke to a soft sound near her bed. Not a scream, not a whisper, just a name, spoken in the voice of her long-dead mother, Helena. She did not sleep again. Down below, the basin glowed faintly. The ash churned, and from beneath the roots, something stretched slowly. Gently, not to rise, but to reach. Not to claim, but to understand. Some stories knock once before entering. Others are already inside, waiting long before you ever hear them. By the 8th day since the basin awakened, the silence inside St. Joseph's convent was no longer peaceful. It had become anticipatory, like the hush before a storm, like breath held too long, like the pause between question and answer. The first warning came with hooves. They arrived before dawn. Iron shoes crunching frozen mud on the convent's outer path. Not fast, not many, just enough. 2 horses, 1 cart, and 1 figure in. The saddle, cloaked in grey wool, with gloves to clean for travel. From her window in the apothecary, Sister Beatrix watched them dismo. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, carried no sword, but moved like he didn't need one. A bishop's seal hung around his neck. The emissary's name was Father Ulrich. He said little when he arrived. He bowed his head, offered a blessing, and handed a scroll to Mother Elsbetha without meeting her eyes. A parchment, short and terse. "It has come to the bishop's attention that irregular rites may be observed at St. Joseph. You are hereby commanded to open. Your records permit inspection of all relics and ensure strict adherence to Benedictine order. The Lord watches. Rome remembers." Elsbetha didn't flinch. She only nodded, then handed the scroll to Magda. Ulrich smiled politely. "Routine. I'll be discreet." No one believed him. By mid-morning, the convent shifted. Chores were still done, hymns still sung, meals still prepared, but everything moved with tension. Eyes narrowed. voices low. A second rhythm beneath the visible one. Some sisters, especially the novices, whispered that God had sent judgment. Others, like Sister Marin, whispered nothing. She simply moved through the halls with one hand, always brushing the stone, as if listening through her fingertips. Ulrich's inspection began with the obvious. He walked the scriptorium, asked about scrolls, poked at relics behind glass. He questioned the integrity of a cracked chalice. He raised his brow at a saint's toe bone that was clearly from a lamb. But it wasn't until he visited the chapel that the mood shifted. He paused before the western wall, where St. Odili's statue stood, and tilted his head. "You've added a curtain," Elsbetha answered calmly. "For winter drafts." Ulrich's eyes moved across the wall, the seams, the faint carving of the Valknut, barely visible in the stone. He smiled again, too polite, too sharp. "And what lies beyond that wall, Reverend Mother?" Elsbetha's voice did not waver. "Storage, dust, forgotten things." He nodded, but nothing living. "Only memory," she said softly. In the garden, Alina had stopped tending the roots. She could feel it, a pressure, a presence. The saplings had stopped growing, not withered, just waiting. When she touched the bark, it was warm. When she closed her eyes, she saw faces in the leaves. Not frightening, familiar. Women she had seen in dreams. Women with hands calloused from prayer and labor. Women with eyes that watched not from above, but below. Ulrich summoned Beatrix that evening. He questioned her privately. Asked about strange behavior changes in ritual. Any signs of hysteria or false visions. Beatrix, ever loyal to the church, gave careful answers. She spoke of Alina's sleeplessness, of Magda's stares, of dreams whispered in dark corners. But when Ulrich asked about the ash basin, she faltered, because Beatrix, too, had begun to dream. She hadn't told anyone, but 3 nights in a row, she had seen herself walking into water, black as ink, and coming out with roots instead of feet. She did not tell Ulrich this. She only said, "I worry for the younger sisters." Ulrich nodded, as if satisfied, but his eyes gleamed cold. Down below, the basin did not glow. It pulsed faintly, not with anger, not with malice, with awareness. The woman in the roots was not sleeping. She was watching, learning, listening through dream and bark, and the blood of women who had walked this land long before saints wore halos. That night, Agnes found a second scroll, hidden deep behind the convent's oldest psalter, a single page, written in Latin, in a hand older than parchment. Itself when Rome forgets, she remembers. When men silence, she waits. Her roots hold the names they bury. Her ash is not for cleansing, it is for remembering. Agnes didn't understand it all, but she copied it by hand. She tucked it beneath her robe. And she did not sleep in the dormitory. Marin whispered to Magda, both of them staring at the rafters. "He'll find it soon, I know. Then we must choose." Magda's fingers twitched. She was remembering something. Not from books, not from Mass, but from her mother, who once told her. Stories of old goddesses who bled rivers and swallowed stars. She thought they were nonsense, until she touched the basin. Now, she wasn't sure. Ulrich asked to descend. He approached Elsbetha. At dawn, gloves already on. "There's a space behind the western chapel," he said. "I'd like to examine it." Elsbetha looked at him calmly. "It is locked, for a reason." "Open it," he said. She did not move. He stepped closer. "If you refuse, I report it." "You know what happens next." Elsbetha nodded. "I do." "Then..." She looked him in the eye and smiled for the first time. "But I don't think she will let you in." He blinked. Elsbetha said nothing. That evening, the stone wall behind the statue cracked. No sound. No violence. Just a fissure, thin and dark. Down the center of the Valknut, the candles in the chapel all blew out at once. Alina, Marin, Magda, Agnes, and Elsbetha all woke at the same moment, from different dreams, but with the same phrase on their lips. "She is coming up." And beneath the convent, the roots moved, not to crush, not to break, to rise, because it was time, not for war, but for remembrance. Some awakenings begin in silence, not with fire. not with thunder, but with breath. Slow, deliberate, passing through stone like smoke, through straw, in the 12th night. Since the basin stirred, the stones of St. Oseth's convent exhaled, and the sisters inhaled, not air, not doctrine, something older, something alive. The crack in the chapel wall was no longer hairline. It had widened, silently, steadily, down the center of the Valknut, like the parting of a seam in flesh. The statue of St. Odile stood unmoved. But behind her, the wall breathed, and deep beneath the chapel floor, the basin's surface had changed, no longer still ash, now rippling, as if wind moved beneath the stone. Father Ulrich was no longer smiling. He had fasted, he had prayed, he had spent hours in his makeshift quarters copying his report to the bishop. Words like heresy, unorthodoxy, and pagan mysticism filled his parchment. But none of them felt sufficient, because each time he passed by, a sister, Alina Marin, Magda, their eyes unsettled him, not rebellious. Knowing that night, he forced entry. He took a hammer from the tool shed and returned to the chapel alone. The moon was high, the convent quiet. The cracked wall stood before him like a locked door with no handle. Ulrich raised the hammer behind him. Every candle in the chapel ignited at once. Without a hand, he turned, breath caught. The room bathed in flame. No wind, no smoke, only light. And whispering, not aloud, not from mouths, but from stone. Ulrich stepped back. The hammer dropped. The crack in the wall deepened, not from his blow, but from its own will. And from beneath the chapel floor, a sound wet, low, like roots shifting through wet soil, echoed into the rafters. Elsbetha woke from sleep, without a sound. She had been dreaming of salt water, of a sea with no sky, of women with bark for skin, and eyes that glowed like moonlit rivers. She dressed silently, no veil, no candle. She did not call the others, but they rose all the same. Magda, Maren, Agnes, Alina, no signal, no sound, just shared breath, in the garden. The saplings bent westward, toward the chapel, even without wind. Inside, Ulrich stood shaking. The crack had split fully now, a black wound in the stone, and behind it, a stair narrow ancient downward. He turned to flee, but Elsbetha blocked the door. She said nothing, just looked at him behind her. For sisters entered, barefoot, unarmed. Calm. Ulrich reached for his cross. Back, he rasped. Back from me. No one moved. I am a man of God, he warned. Elsbetha finally spoke. So are we. He laughed bitterly. You worship a thing in the dirt. No, said Maren. She worships nothing, said Magda. She remembers, whispered Agnes. She is us, said Alina. The stone behind the wall shifted, slowly, deliberately, like an ancient jaw unlocking a soft breath. Like a lullaby flowed. Up from below, Ulrich stepped back. His foot caught on the fallen hammer. He stumbled, but did not fall. Then he fled. He did not wait for daybreak. He did not bless the gate. He mounted his horse and vanished into the forest, and did not look. Back down the stair, they descended. Elsbetha first. Then Maren, Magda, Agnes, Alina, last no words. The air was not cold, not damp. It was warm, like breath. At the base of the steps, the basin awaited, still black, still silent, but now shimmering. Elsbetha stepped to its edge. Her reflection stared, back then blinked. Not in mimicry, in response. Each sister knelt, no chant, no rite. They simply placed their hands on the stone. It pulsed. The ash stirred then. Rising from the center of the basin, not violently, not suddenly, came a face, carved, of bark and ash and memory. Eyes closed, lips unmoving. But around her the roots bloomed, not into trees, not into thorns, into names, etched into every limb. Every vein colon, women, forgotten ones, buried ones, burned ones. Their names whispered through the chamber like prayers. Turned sideways, Betha, whispered, "We're here." The face opened its eyes. She smiled, not with lips, with light above, in the dormitories. The novices stirred in their sleep, but none woke afraid. They dreamed of warmth, of soil, of songs, not sung in any language known to Rome, and in the chapel. The wall began to close. The crack healed stone to stone, as if it had never opened. Saint Odile's statue stood still, but a single root now coiled at its base, delicate. Alive the next morning, the sisters returned to their duties. Bread was baked, floors swept, psalms sung. Father Ulrich did not return. His report, if ever written, never reached Rome, and deep beneath the convent of St. Osith, the basin lay, calm, not empty, not asleep, just watching like always. Some stories don't end, they settle, like dust, like ash, like breath in the rafters long after the words are gone. And when the final line is spoken, they do not vanish, they become place. The winter passed slowly at St. Ostot's. Snow came early, as it often did on the edge of the marshlands, falling in soft hushes over the slanted roof, weighing the eaves like tired arms. The chimney smoked less, the bread rose slower, and the garden went still. But beneath the frost, something stirred, roots that did not sleep, memory that did not freeze, and a presence, ancient and wordless, that hummed beneath the chapel like the low sound of a mother, remembering her child's first breath. The sisters kept their rhythm. Morning psalms, silent meals, laundry at the frozen stream. But something in their eyes had changed, not wildness, not fear. Recognition, the kind you see in people who have passed through fire, and come out smelling of the earth. Alina, once a soft-voiced novice, now walked the corridors like a ghost of her future self. She whispered prayers in the ancient tongue, when she thought no one was listening, but someone always was, because even the walls listened. Now, Agnes took to writing. She had always loved copying scripture, tracing delicate gold leaf and Latin margins. But now, her pages were filled with names, not from books, not from records, but names that came to her in sleep. Dozens, hundreds, women's names, some sharp as splinters, some soft as sighs, names buried by time, burned by fire, erased by marriage, and law, and silence. She did not question where they came from, she simply wrote. Marin began carving. No one had seen her take up a blade. Yet by the hearth, each evening, new shapes appeared. Small wooden figurines, bent women in cloaks, girls with roots for toes, infants swaddled in leaves. She did not sell them, did not explain. She only placed them on a shelf in the chapel's side alcove, beside Saint Odile, without words. No one moved them. Magda no longer cried in her sleep. Instead, she sang low, wordless melodies that came from deep in her chest, and echoed through the dormitory like a lullaby, made of soil and bone. Even the goats slept better when she sang, and those who listened said. The air felt warmer, even in February. Elsbetha, now graying beneath her veil, grew quieter. She no longer led the Mass with formal cadence. Instead, her sermons softened more questions than answers. What does God remember? She asked one morning. What does she forget? The novices did not always understand, but they listened, because in Elsbetha's presence now, there was something more than authority. There was depth, like speaking to a river that had never dried. The basin, beneath the chapel, remained still. No more faces, no more roots, only Ashdod, and yet, when they touched its surface, they felt full, not haunted, not afraid, held like a hand beneath their ribs that had always been there, waiting. The villagers came less often. Some whispered of strange things in the woods, animals gathering near the convent walls, crows that perched for hours unmoving, but others came for comfort. A young girl, mute since birth, who began to hum after drinking water left near the chapel. A widow who dreamed of her mother's voice for the first time in 20 years. A farmer who left his stillborn lamb at the chapel steps and returned the next morning to find it breathing. Curled against the statue of Saint Odile, the sisters said nothing. They only kept watch, and sometimes, quietly, they smiled. One afternoon, a cart arrived. No horses, no driver, just a wooden cart, rolled up the hill by hand, with one woman walking beside it. She was old, older than anyone they'd seen. Her cloak was stitched with runes. Her left eye was milky. Her boots were too clean for mud. She did not ask for entry. She nodded once at Elsbetha, and the doors opened. No questions. She stayed for 3 days, slept near the basin, spoke to no one, wrote nothing down, and on the 4th morning she was gone. But where she had sat, they found a pile of feathers, neatly arranged into the shape of a tree. No one moved them. The church sent no more letters. Ulrich was never heard from again, and the outside world shifted subtly. In Rome, one monk dreamed of a chapel with roots instead of columns. In Canterbury, a nun painted a mural of a woman emerging from bark, though she swore it came from scripture. In France, a child drew the Wochnut on a parchment and said it meant mother. And in St. Osith, the soil grew warm before the thaw. The sisters gathered each night now, not for mass, for memory. They sat in the circle chamber where the basin once pulsed, and lit no candles, only silence, and each woman, when she felt the time, would speak a name aloud, a single name. Then they would sleep, and in sleep, they would dream of those names, whole lives behind them. Laughter, and love, and loss. It wasn't doctrine, it wasn't liturgy, but it was sacred. Spring came early that year. The garden flourished. The animals bore twins. Even the vines over the wall bloomed with small red flowers. No one could name. They did not try to name them. They let them grow. And in the convent ledgers, where once were only dates and relic lists, a new entry appeared. The root remembers. The ash holds. The silence listens. We keep. Nothing more. Just 4 lines, written in no one's hand, but in every heart. And so, if you ever find yourself walking the hills near St. Osith, and you pass the convent walls just after twilight, you might see them, women with quiet steps and steady eyes, tending soil, boiling herbs, teaching a child how to hold a sparrow without fear. You may hear a song, low and strange, with no words. You may feel the air press gently against your skin, like an unseen palm. You may even pause and wonder, is something beneath me breathing? And the land will not answer, but you'll know. Some stories do not end like a door closing. They end like a song, fading not into silence, but into memory. And memory is where St. Osith's final chapter was written, not in books, not on vellum, but in soil, in stone, in sleep. The convent's walls stood weathered now. Moss had claimed the corners. Ivy wrapped the window frames like gentle hands. And the bell tower leaned a little more westward each season. No, repairs were made, because nothing was broken, only aged, and the sisters, too, had aged. Elsbetha's hair was white now. So was Moran's. Magda's hands were knotted with time, but still stitched every seam in the cloister's robes. Agnes, once restless, now sat most mornings beneath the linden tree, naming clouds aloud, in languages no longer spoken. And Alina, oh Alina, had taken up the veil fully. She no longer feared the basin. She no longer feared herself. The basin had changed. It no longer shimmered, nor pulsed, nor whispered. It rested like a mother whose children had grown. Its ash was dry now, still and smooth like velvet. But when touched, it gave warmth, just enough. Just a trace, and that was enough. Because the sisters no longer sought revelation, only remembrance. One evening, as twilight folded over the convent like a soft shawl, the sisters gathered in the circle chamber for what they all somehow knew would be the last time there were no candles, no hymns, just the hush of aged breath, and the scent of peat and old rosewater. Elsbetha stood at the basin's edge. She did not speak. She simply reached into the ash dot, not to remove anything, but to leave something, a ring, iron, simple, worn smooth by years. It sank into the ash without a ripple, and in that moment, the air shifted, the walls exhaled, and from the center of the basin, a light bloomed pale gold, silent, like the final sigh of a sleeping world. It rose, pulsed once, then vanished. That night, no dreams came, only sleep, deep, whole, undisturbed. The kind of sleep known only to children and those who have given everything away freely. In the weeks that followed, the convent emptied not suddenly. Not tragically, just slowly. Elsbetha was the first to pass. She died in her bed, beneath a wool blanket stitched with a tree and a circle of stars. Her hand was placed on her chest. Her lips were parted slightly, as if mid-prayer, or mid-lullaby Marin. Followed weeks later. Then Agnes. Then Magda, each passing like a feather falling. No pain. No fear. Only stillness. Only return. Alina stayed the longest. She kept the convent door open, taught the last novice how to tend the garden, sat by the chapel. Each dusk an HUMME. The villagers no longer questioned the place. They came to leave offerings. Candles, herbs, names scratched into bits of driftwood. No one asked for miracles anymore. They only came to remember. One spring morning, Alina walked alone into the chapel. Her veil was clean, her boots muddy, her breath steady. She placed one hand on St. Odili's statue, the other on the wall behind it. Then she smiled, a full, quiet smile, and was gone. No body, no trace, only the faint scent of rosemary, and the basin empty. For the first time, years passed, then decades, then centuries. The convent crumbled slowly, lovingly, like a tree returning to forest. Its stones were taken by nearby villagers too. Built wells, homes, garden walls. But no one disturbed the chapel. It simply remained roofless. Root-covered. Still today, if you walk near the marshlands, you may find it. The outline of a wall. The hollow where a statue once stood. A patch of soft black earth that seems strangely warm to the touch. Even in winter. And if you kneel there, if you listen, you may hear it. Not a voice, not a sound, but presence. A kind of memory, not yours, but shared. As if the land is remembering for you. And you'll know without question that something was kept here. Something sacred, something soft, something strong. So sleep now, let the stones hum, let the ash settle, let the names return to the silence from which they came. This story is not gone, it is kept, and you are part of it now, always, forever, at peace.